All right. Whew. That was great. That was great. Thank you guys for leading us in that. So last week, if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 12, and we're going to hit, I think, 13 verses today, right? So, we're just really just running through it at an amazing pace. So if you have a Bible, you can grab one. You also want to mark down today Mark chapter 3. If you want to put a little space holder for Mark 3, we're going to be there a little bit as well. So if you haven't been here last week, we started Matthew 12. What happened was Jesus was walking through grain fields, and it's the Sabbath, right? And so the Sabbath is you're not supposed to work, and so there's this conversation, the whole into a courtroom debate, essentially between Jesus and his. Did you bring me more water? You're amazing. Thank you so much. So it kind of turned into a kind of a courtroom debate, and eventually Jesus just kind of lays it all out there. It essentially says, well, I'm greater than David, right? He said, greater than the priests, greater than Torah, right? Greater than the temple, right? Jesus keeps making himself, kind of just laying it out that I am what this is all about, right? The great I am kind of thing, right? And then it hits this mic drop at the end of what we did last week where he says, the Son of Man, talking about himself, is Lord of the Sabbath. And so if you were here last week, we talked about really finding some actual physical rest in Jesus and giving time for God to speak into you and into us. But the story is going to transition. It's still Sabbath, all right? But the scene is going to change. Jesus is going to go from a field to a gathering of people. Because remember, he said some wild things in first part of this chapter, but we said because they were in a field, Jesus probably outnumbered, his crew probably outnumbered the Pharisees, and there's all this kind of tension happening. And so, but now they're going to kind of move into Pharisee territory. Are you ready? All right. Verse 9. He left that place, the fields, right? He left that place and entered their synagogue. So now I want you to see something that Matthew is doing here, and this is where the Mark piece kind of picks up. Because remember, we said that each gospel writer is telling a story, the story of Jesus, to really different audiences altogether. And so one of the things that I picked up or was shown to me in Mark 3, verse 1, I want you to see it. It says, again, so this is the same story. So the same story in two different gospels, right? Again, he, Jesus, right, entered the synagogue. And it's like, well, that feels very similar, right? But that word there is, and so in Matthew actually writes his gospel after Mark does, right? And so Matthew's got, I want them to know that this was their synagogue. So what does he mean by saying there? And so by the time Matthew's church was hearing the gospel read to them, like what Matthew was trying to write to his church, that the Jewish Christians at the time would have already been beginning to be pushed out of the synagogue, right? It's like you can't follow this Jesus person and still be a part of this situation, right? And so he's letting them know, Matthew's is whispering to them, hey, listen, you're going through this in real time, talking to his congregation, where you're feeling pushed out and what used to be home doesn't feel like home anymore. And so what he's kind of saying is like, Jesus dealt with that as well. The place where he was supposed to be, right? He's supposed to be welcome, supposed to be heard, seen, and really lifted up is the place where he was rejected. And so Matthew goes, it's their synagogue, right? It's their synagogue. And so here's the good news. It's because when places that we thought were safe become hostile, when the communities that we thought were home begin to feel cold, we can remember that Jesus is not outside of that story, that he's right here in the midst of it with us. I know that the United Methodist Church went through a huge split over the last couple years. And it's both sides view the other with a similar lackluster, which would be the nicest way I've heard someone say it, a lackluster attitude. But what used to be isn't what it's not what it is anymore, right? It doesn't have the same feeling. It doesn't. And so I remember feeling that way when I left the Church of God. It was, for me, it was like, man, these were my people, right? These were everyone that I was raised with. This was what the only church I understood or knew, and I thought everyone else was wrong, which that was a wild awakening. But leave it, right? But it was like it's not home anymore. It's their church to some degree, right? It's their synagogue. It's their church, and we're not welcome, at least as we are. We're not welcome. So Matthew telling this congregation, he's telling us something that John really wants us to understand in his gospel. It's and you probably have heard this. I'm going to paraphrase it. John 15, 18 and 20. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. Right? If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. So this is not our world. This is not our kingdom. When I'm talking about just the city or the country right, this is not where we belong. We belong to Jesus. Like, we belong in a different way. And that's really what we've been trying to cover for 2 years, is that this is a different kingdom that we're a part of, and that it's subverting, that we are actually in the business of subverting the real, or this other kingdom, right? That we're a part of Jesus' kingdom. And so pick up at let's go to verse 9, and we'll grab 10 as well here. So it says, he left that place, and entered their synagogue. A man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath? So that they might, and Matthew notes, so they might accuse him, right? That's kind of the end of that. So just a little more context. So at this point, Jesus is very, very well known, right? He's been healing, feeding, doing miracles, stopping storms, bringing dead people back to life, right? That attracts attention. And so if you needed to see Jesus, if you wanted to see Jesus, if you needed a healing, every good Jewish male would be at synagogue on Sabbath, right? So if Jesus is in town, you're going to find him at synagogue. Right? Because, and they might actually ask him to teach, right? A rabbi would if they were roaming the cities, like if they were in town, they would often ask you to even teach. And so this is kind of so if you needed healing, right, this is where you would go. Like this is on this day, because Jesus might be there, even though you're not technically supposed to heal on the Sabbath. So picture the scene. A man with a withered hand is just likely just being a good Jew, right? He just shows up to synagogue, shows up to hear Torah, right? It's like, this is what I'm supposed to do, honor God, and listen. The Pharisees point the man out. There's not even really a conversation, right? There's not like, hey, young man, come over here. I want to ask Jesus a question about you, right? There's none of this. It's not this kind of kind. It's just kind of, hey, look at that guy with the mangled hand. What do you think? Can you heal? Can you do this on Sabbath? And so they see Jesus walk in, and they see the mangled hand man. They go, this is our chance, right? This is our shot. And so Matthew says that they're only asking this question to Jesus to trick him, right? Their hope is, if they can get Jesus to say something wrong, or to say something that's not acceptable, or that's against Torah, right? That his followers would go, oh, he's not who we thought he was. It's like, so if we can just trap him, if we can just get him to say something stupid one time, then they will abandon him surely. But, and listen, that's what happens when religion goes wrong. You ever seen religion go wrong? Religion goes wrong when people stop mattering. When it becomes about winning the debate, right? When it becomes about making the right arguments. And that's what we see a lot in this New Testament, going back and forth with Jesus. Like, we want to win the argument. And Jesus is like, I want to love people, right? It's like that's the whole argument between these two people coming together. And so we understand that they don't care. They don't care about the man. Is that clear? They don't care about the man. They don't even care about the crowd watching. They just want to shrink Jesus' influence. And so people become tools for power, right? Become tools for power instead of people to love. And so in verse 11, it says this. He said to them, Jesus, suppose one of you has only one sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath. Will you not lay hold of it and lift it out? And so here's the cool thing I think that Jesus is doing. This is like Jesus didn't really make this lesson up. This was actually like I'm taking an ethics class in seminary, and one of the things we talk about is like the trolley dilemma. Has anyone ever heard of this? Right. So the trolley dilemma. Right. So the trolley. You're on a train. It's going down a track, and it's heading towards 4 people that can't move. And so you can flip the switch, and it changes tracks, but then it will hit one person who can't move, right? And so you have to kind of, so there's this, it's a hypothetical conversation. It's not really about getting an answer, right? It's about thinking it through and asking questions, clarifying questions, figuring out, So this is actually that similar type of question. It's one that they would have, discussed, right? They'd sit around in a chair, with their chairs and go, so let's just say one of your sheep falls into a hole, right? And then they just kind of have these, this debate back and forth. And so what Jesus is doing, Jesus is going to make the abstract personal, right? He's just going to go, you can talk about because one of their answers would be something like, well, if sheep fell in a hole on Sabbath, I could feed it and water it, because I'm allowed to feed and water it, and then on the next day, then I can go save it, right? That would be one of the plausible conversations, arguments that someone would come up with. And so Jesus just kind of calls it out, and he refuses to play the game and takes in their abstract argument and says, seriously, if you lost a sheep in a hole, be honest. If no one was around, are you going to let your asset die? Right? Are you going to because it's just, a sheep is an asset, right, for them. It's part of your trading, your livelihood. Are you just going to lose for the Sabbath law? And he goes, you're going to save the sheep. And so this is called a can I say it right? Qual-Wahomer argument. It just basically means, this is what Jesus does this a lot, and Paul does it a lot too. We'll see. It's called from lesser to greater, is all that is. So they'll do something like, well, if a sheep is worth this, right? So then go to Matthew 12, and this is what this argument is about. So verse 12, how much more valuable is a human being than a sheep, right? So it is lawful. Jesus just says it is. It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath, and it's really Jesus makes it so. It's how are we even arguing? I wonder if Jesus just has to be frustrated sometimes. Why are we arguing about some of these things? And again, it's not about the argument. Jesus is about people. And so, what do you mean you wouldn't help a human? You would help a sheep, but you wouldn't help a person made in the image of God? It's that's a ridiculous argument that you're having. Of course you can do good on the Sabbath. Now, I want you to see what Jesus does next, because this is good. This is good. Verse 13. And Jesus is just so good at dealing with the Pharisees. So then he said to the man, he stretched it out, and it was restored as sound as the other. Now, we've gone through about 10-ish healings in Matthew so far. We've been, right? And almost all of them, Jesus says be healed, touches them, does something physical that shows you that it's Jesus that healed them, right? Jesus says to the storm, stop, it stops, right? Jesus says to the girl, stop being dead, she stops being dead, right? There's this whole kind of thing happening. But here, notice, Jesus, all he says is, stretch out your hand, which is completely allowed. And so the body has to obey. So imagine, I can't remember who it was, I think it was Bruner, I was reading. He says, listen, so when Jesus spoke to the storm, It was the voice of the creator of the world telling the creation what to do. Like that, the creator is allowed to tell. And so it's the same voice that's winds to stop that tells the man to stretch open his hand. It just has to, right? It has to stretch open because Jesus told it to. And so, but they're left with, Jesus has left them in a really big predicament because he didn't do anything, right? And the man's healed. Who did it? Right? It's like, well, who did it? And so they have to decide, like, so if, and this is going to happen later in the chapter, they're going to start calling him, evil or from Beelzebul or, all these different things because this healed, right? The healing happened, and it's either God or it's Jesus, and they don't want it to be Jesus, right? But it's clearly, and listen, they're not alone in this crowd, right? They're not alone in this crowd, so the crowd is watching. So even the Pharisees they can't even lie, they can't make it up, they can't do any of that stuff, right? Because everyone's watching. They'll lose credibility if they go, this wasn't a Jesus. It's like, it's clearly Jesus. And so they're left with no ground to stand on. Because if they admit that, then they have to admit that God is standing in their midst, right in front of them. And that's the very thing that they're unwilling to confess. And so in verse 14 it says, but the Pharisees went out and conspired against him how to destroy him. I mean, so the tension is rising. But I love what Matthew does here because he really exposes their hypocrisy, right? Because they didn't think it was right to heal a man on the Sabbath, but they'll conspire to kill a man on the Sabbath. Right? It's like that's a whole different world, right? Like you are hypocrites, and you cannot function that way. And so, it actually gets worse. Because on the very day meant for rest, they're restless for revenge, right? On the day meant to celebrate life, they're scheming how to take it. And then if you go back to Mark, you still have Mark 3, verse 6, same story. Mark has more. It says the Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians, right, against him, how to destroy him. So Mark tells us they didn't just leave angry. They joined forces with the Herodians, Rome's loyalists, right? So you have the religious elite and you have the powerful, right, the power, and that's how deep the hate runs. Religion and politics, enemies in every other setting suddenly find common ground in their opposition to Jesus. And so, listen, history keeps doing that. The Pharisees and the Herodians had nothing in common except their fear of losing control. And ever since, whenever religion and politics trade favors instead of truth, when they start trying to scratch each other's backs, faith is used to defend power instead of challenging it, right? And the whole thing is about challenging power, right? The whole Sermon on the Mount, challenging power. And so it's the same alliance is reborn, and the cross becomes a tool rather than a calling. And it's used against the very people Jesus says, I'm here for. So here's the thing. When something is that simple and laid out in front of you, and people still resist it, have you ever made such a good argument that you're like, you have to understand what I'm saying, right? And they still go, I don't see it, right? It's like, that means you're starting your arguments from suspicion, all right? When something is simple and laid out in front of you and you still resist, it's because they don't want to be wrong, right? They don't want Jesus to be right, because if Jesus is right, he threatens the system that they've built, right? This whole thing, it's like, they're like, this is working, it's so well-oiled, Rome's kind of nice to us, and then we get to be, kinda, and we're in charge, and we look good, and people like us down there, and they're going to lose all. Like Jesus keeps doing this. They're losing all of that control. I run into this a lot when I'm discussing open and affirming churches with non-affirming churches. Because what happens, a lot of it is, it becomes, and I did this over the summer. So I'm off social media during school year, but in the summer, I like to get on. And I woke up one day and I chose violence. And I decided I was going to spend the whole day arguing. on the Gospel Coalition's Facebook page. and I did, and I did it well. But what would happen was every time I tried to make a point, they would try to switch the argument instead of dealing with what's in front of it. And what you come to find out is they're starting the argument with the idea of God could never be that merciful. That's the starting point for them, right? And listen, I used to believe that, right? I used to believe that. And so they always start from suspicion, right? From this assumption that God could never be that merciful. It's the same spirit as the Pharisees. The conversation doesn't begin with curiosity. They're not going, could God really be this good? Like, what if you started your arguments with that? Could God be this good? When my mind changed, it wasn't because I lost an argument. Because I didn't. I was pretty good at it, arguing the other side. I changed when I began to ask the right questions, right? What if God really is this merciful? What if God is this good that everybody is welcome at the table? That's an amazing God. And so right there is where the story turns. Because when people stop asking questions in good faith, when they stop wondering, could God really be this merciful? What's left is control rather than curiosity. And so that's what happens in verse 14. The Pharisees don't want to understand Jesus. They don't want to understand Jesus. They want to eliminate him, right? They can't handle a love that doesn't fit their system. Right? That kind of love doesn't fit within their system. And so Matthew says right after they plot to destroy him, that Jesus walks away quietly. There's something about that I love. Because I'm not good at that, right? I want to argue more. Right? That's my go-to. But in verse 15 it says this. When Jesus became aware of this, he departed, right? So he became aware of the plot to kill him. He goes, we're going to get out of here, guys. And so many, and it says many followed him, and he cured all of them. And he ordered them, this is still the Sabbath, right? So he just went so the first healing was it passed by, he didn't actually, he didn't make it clean, right, that he did it. And then they walk away from the argument, and he just goes, I'm just healing everybody, right? And just everybody on the Sabbath, this is what we're doing, right? So it says many followed him, and he cured them all. Verse 16. And he ordered them not to make him known. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah. So what that means is in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the book of Isaiah, this is roughly in there that way. And so it says this in Isaiah, Matthew quotes, "Here is my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, with whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not wrangle or cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. He will not break a bruised reed or quench a smoldering wick until he brings justice to victory. And in his name, the Gentiles will hope." And so Matthew says, Jesus withdrew and many followed him. And he healed them all. He doesn't fight back, right? He doesn't fight back. He just keeps being who he is, right? He's like, haters are going to hate. I'm just going to keep healing people. I'm just going to keep loving people, and everyone else is going to have to deal with it. And so that's what Matthew wants us to see next. What kind of Messiah Jesus really is. Not the kind who shouts his way into power. We got enough of that. But the kind who loves his way into victory. So the world's way is to win by overpowering. Right? It's I'm just going to, might makes right? Or the golden rule is he who has the most gold makes the rules, right? It's but the Pharisees shout and Jesus goes quiet. They plot, Jesus heals. They posture for control, he kneels to serve. So be leery of the loudest people in the rooms. Be leery of the loudest people in the rooms. And so he doesn't crush the bruised. He binds them up. Right? He doesn't snuff out the weak flame. He breathes on it until it begins to burn again. He doesn't discard what's wounded. He restores what's still worth saving. And so that's where the text lands with us today. The same Jesus who refused to argue his way into being right is still quietly working in the world, healing, mending, restoring, still lifting up bruised reeds, still rekindling smolder wicks. So when the noise of religion and culture grows loud, Jesus still chooses the quiet road of mercy. He still walks among the broken and says, stretch out your hand. And so that same Jesus who withdrew to heal rather than to fight would one day go right back in to that group of people. Back into the city that rejected him and let his body be broken so ours could be made whole. That's what this table's about. We remember that mercy always costs something. Mercy always costs something, but Jesus paid the price, right? Jesus paid the price. And so he didn't just heal bruised reeds and rekindle faint flames. He let himself be broken and extinguished so that we could burn again. And so as we come to this table, it's World Communion Sunday. People all over the world today are celebrating communion at the same, roughly the same time. So because this table isn't a reward for the righteous, right? And no one gets to call it the table. Right? It's not their table. It's not their table. Right? It's Jesus' table. And Jesus gets to decide who comes to it. And Jesus said, everyone gets to come to his table. Because the table isn't a reward for the righteous. It's a meal for the bruised and the tired. For anyone who still dares to believe that God might really be that merciful. Could he be that merciful? And so here's the invitation. And I'm going to pray. And you can come around. My wife's going to help me serve communion. And just come around this way, and you can take it and receive it. And you can stand here and take it, or you can go back to your seat, however you desire. But here's the invitation. Come, you who are weary. Come, you who have stopped shouting long enough to listen. Come, you who need to be restored. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you that you're about people. God, would you make sure that we're a church that's about people? Will you make sure that you're constantly on us, on our spirit, on our hearts, to make sure that we're not trying to win arguments. We're not trying to make people look dumb. We just want people to find wholeness. We want people to have life and have it more abundantly. We want a community to know what it's like to be loved by their Creator. And so, God, I thank you for this table. I thank you that on the night that you were crucified, or on the night that you broke bread with your disciples, that you said, break this bread, this is my body, it's broken for you, take and eat. And when you picked up the glass and said, this is the blood of the new covenant. Whenever you do this in remembrance of me. God, thank you for giving us something to always remember. Thank you for what you did on that cross. That you didn't have to. You said you could have called down angels, but you chose to take the nails and take the wounds. And so I'm grateful. And we love you, and it's in your name that we pray.